This video is about environmental justice. It is designed to give you the history of the environmental justice movement and to expose you to what environmental justice means. This video provides various viewpoints on environmental justice. None of these views necessarily reflect those of the Department of Justice or the federal government. Environmental justice first gained national attention in 1982 when 32,000 cubic yards of soil contaminated with PCBs were dumped in a small, rural African-American community in North Carolina. The decision to locate the dump site in this community inspired a church-led protest of civil disobedience by residents and activists. For the first time, widespread attention and public concern focused on the issue of environmental justice. Following the incident in Warren County, independent studies conducted by the General Accounting Office, the United Church of Christ, and the National Law Journal concluded that there is a high correlation between income and race and the location of hazardous waste facilities. Studies also concluded that penalties for violating environmental laws at sites near minority populations were lower than penalties at sites near other populations, and that abandoned hazardous waste sites in minority areas are identified for cleanup later than sites in other areas. On February 11, 1994, President Clinton signed an executive order entitled Federal Actions to Address Environmental Justice in Minority Populations and Low-Income Populations. The executive order does not create any new cause of action. It does require the Department of Justice to address as appropriate the disproportionately high and adverse human health and environmental effects of its programs, policies, and activities on low-income and minority communities. Environmental law. No community should be subjected to unfair and disproportionate levels of environmental hazards because of its race, ethnicity, or level of income. In order to apply this principle appropriately, it's important to have a broad understanding of environmental justice. All over the country, low-income and minority communities and federally recognized tribes are confronting environmental risks. Some are speaking up and sometimes taking their concerns to court. Low-income residents of public housing in West Dallas, Texas, charged that the operator of the housing was responsible for extraordinarily high rates of lead poisoning among resident children. African-American residents of a small community in rural North Carolina challenged the waste disposal practices of a local commercial hog farm because they believed the practices threatened their health. Low-income residents of a trailer community in Wyoming were supplied drinking water through a public water system that failed to meet minimum standards set by federal law to protect human health. Low-income residents of Sunrise, Louisiana, opposed a local oil refinery whose emissions, they believe, have caused unusually high rates of cancer, breathing problems, and rashes. And low-income residents of Altgeld Gardens, a housing complex in Southside Chicago, are concerned about a concentration of industrial and toxic waste facilities surrounding their community, including a chemical waste landfill, a hazardous waste incinerator, and a municipal landfill 80 feet high.
For 27 years, my community has been in struggle with the city of New York about the location and siting of the second largest municipal waste sewage treatment plant in the United States of America in our community. It is half a mile long, about 6 stories high. It's designed to treat 170 million gallons of raw sewage every day. And it was originally supposed to be built on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, right behind Lincoln Center and the Metropolitan Opera, but was moved to West Harlem because it was felt that that kind of land use was not the kind of land use that they would want to have on the Upper West Side, so they needed to find another community that didn't have the same kind of value that the Upper West Side had, and so they found my community, which is predominantly African American and Latino, We have the highest asthma mortality rate in the Western Hemisphere. Not in the United States of America, but in the Western Hemisphere. And we are certain that the reason is because not only do we have the North River Sewage Treatment Plant, but 11 other environmentally hazardous facilities that all came after the North River Sewage Treatment Plant was sited in our community in 1968.
We've had to get people to sort of put aside a knee-jerk reaction or a quick reaction to the issue. Some folks say, oh, that won't affect my industry. Others say, we've never done anything that could get us accused of environmental injustice. What I've tried to say to folks is, put those notions aside and understand that this is a very strong movement. I think the business community is beginning to recognize that these issues are not passing. People feel very deeply and very passionately about them, and that there are legitimate, in some cases, concerns that do in fact need to be addressed.
If racism and racial discriminations does in fact exist in, say, housing, if racial discrimination exists in education, if racial discrimination exists in employment, if racial discrimination exists in health care, then why would it be so hard to accept the fact that there will be racial discrimination when it comes to the environment?
If you look at any single environmental hazard that affects humans, it affects poor people and people of color more.
Clearly, when you've got people who are involved with survival issues, day-to-day existence issues, it's more difficult to get involved in political processes. And the difficulty is exacerbated by the existing construct of environmental laws and regulations, which in many cases impede public participation in decision-making around these issues. A wide range of problems that we're dealing with, and they are susceptible to a wide range of solutions, some which exist, some which will have to be created, and some which will require a vigorous pursuit of obedience to existing law. It's important to know that environmental justice is the objective, and if in reviewing a fact pattern or a particular set of circumstances what is illuminated is an injustice, then that's a pretty good point at which to start and base an analysis around what's happening in a particular case. For example, are there adverse health effects occurring in the community? Is there some situation that's exacerbating the health effects in the community? Are there existing vulnerabilities which are intensified as a result of emissions, water or air emissions that are occurring in a particular community? Are there policy implications that are involved? For example, does the community have adequate access to the public policy process? Has the community been involved in decision making? In terms of Native American communities, has the situation been dealt with recognizing that we're dealing with sovereign nations and government-to-government relationships? Are we perceiving an injustice of some sort?